Welcome to another episode of How Good Are X Weapons in Guild Wars 2. Today we're gonna take a look at the last class in our series, which is Warrior. If you haven't seen all the other videos in this series, be sure to check out the description where you can find a link to all of them. This is a series where I talk about all the weapons a class has access to and rate them in terms of how good they are in power damage builds, in conduit builds, in hybrid builds, but not only tell you where you can use them, but also give my opinion on their current state, why they are good, why they are bad, and this is for new players to actually get a grasp of which kind of weapon might be good for them, but also for veterans that just want to debate with me about build crafting with this specific class and weapon. As always, thanks a lot to all my supporters on YouTube, Twitch and Patreon that help me keep the lights on. And now, let's jump straight in. Warrior has the most amount of core weapons, so let's start with the sword. Sword Mainhand is very basic, it's a core weapon, does a lot of basic conduit damage, bleeding on the auto attack. The power scaling is actually not to be underestimated. You can use it nowadays in a power build as well. It's more of a PvE weapon for the most part because the 3 skill is also some kind of execute, does a lot of power damage as well and conduit damage, so it's a hybrid scaling weapon that also has some nice mobility with the 2 skill that can be used to get, for example, Fire Aura on Berserker. That can be quite nice. But other than that, I would say it's in competitive modes, it's only used for the Savage Leap, I would say. In most situations, I wouldn't go for Sword though. Sword is a little bit power crept in competitive modes, but in PvE it's really good in condi builds and can also work very decently well on power builds that use the arm straight line. So for example, Spellbreaker currently uses a power variant of Sword. I think Sword is in a very nice spot for the most part. I would say maybe buff some kind of utility or some kind of usefulness in competitive modes, but in PvE I think it's a very good weapon. For the Berserker skill of the Sword, you have some nice flurry of attacks and they all deal burning damage, and it's actually quite nice how much damage they do. And it's also interesting because it blocks missiles and it pierces, so it's a really strong skill that actually makes sense to use in competitive modes as well, but of course it's more like a PvE skill because it has some quite long cast time. But I think it's a very fitting skill for Sword. For Sword, the burst skill roots you in place. It's not that good. It gives you some immobilize on the enemy. It's I would say, sadly not the best. It's probably one of the worst burst skills. It's nice condi applications and power damage, but it roots you in place and it's just, it's not that good. Then we have Offhand Sword, very classical weapon that is nowadays quite power crept, but still okay. So you have a block on your 5 skill that is decent. It gives you some adrenaline and also gives you a counterattack that applies bleeding, but typically in PvE, it's not that good. And in competitive modes, this was a really good skill, the 4th skill, because it applied Torment and you could also rip it out to get some damage on the enemy. But nowadays, it's just power crept. I feel like Sword Offhand is like you use it for the block and that's about it. And that's not useful in a lot of situations. Yes, you can make it work. And in competitive modes, I would say it's not too bad. But in PvE, I feel like it's way too power crept by all the other condi offhand weapons. Then we have Hammer. Hammer is interesting, they reworked it quite a lot of times. So Hammer is just some very basic power weapon that has a lot of CC in the kit. You have more damage against CC target with the 2 skill, you have some nice soft CC with Cripple, you have some hard CC with the knockback, and with the backbreaker of course some crazy heavy knockdown. And if the foe is weakened, it's 4 seconds in PvE, it's insane. And this will also recharge your first blow if you strike a target with a Defiance bar, so it's so to say you have some nice combo potential there for PvE. It's very strong in Spellbreaker builds, in power Spellbreaker builds in PvE. It is used in some kind of CC builds in competitive modes and actually also a very decent weapon in World vs. World. You have Rupturing Smash as a Berserker, which is also quite nice with the Daze and Immobilized, but I would say this is not the best primal burst skill. In competitive modes, the normal burst skill is actually quite strong as well. So just having the burst here that gives you crazy amount of stun on the enemy depending on the adrenaline bar, it's really, really good. Then we have Longbow. Longbow is very interesting. It's a very, very clear condi weapon that has some power damage backed in with Arcing Aura as well with the blast finisher. You have nowadays some Daze there as well. You have some nice immobilize in the 5. You have some very strong, if you hit it in melee range, Rain of Fire that gives burning, very hard hitting. The auto attack is not that good, but for the most part you use Longbow for the fire field, either in the Berserk form or the normal form. Both are really good. They are fire fields, they deal a lot of burning damage, and they are guaranteed to remove conditions if you use Cleansing Ire because they count as hitting all the time because they are field. So it's really, really strong. I think Longbow is a very clear Condi weapon that is very good in competitive modes in PvE. It's niche, it's very good. I like Longbow a lot. I think it's a very classic weapon that is still up to date, I would say. By the way, if you want to see more guides like this, be sure to subscribe to my channel. But now to the X Mainhand. X Mainhand is interesting. It was one of the best go-to power weapons before they reworked Spellbreaker a bit and the arm straight line. And now it's a little bit too slow to actually compete with Mace, Dagger, and Sword. Actually, that's the funny thing. Even the hybrid weapon is nowadays a little bit better for a lot of weapons. If you take into consideration that you don't have to, if you don't take the arm straight line, sometimes X can be better. The X2 is really nice. It's really good in solo builds. And the X3 actually hits really hard as well. I think it's a really clear power weapon that is really fun to use. It makes a lot of sense for an XX warrior build or something like that. But in competitive modes, it falls off quite hard, I would say. It's like you just go for all in damage, and if you have enough defense, that makes sense. But most of the time, you want some more utility on your weapon set, so it's not that good. And in PvE, I feel like it's overshadowed by the harder hitting auto attacking weapons like Sword, Mace, and Dagger. So I think X is in a decent spot, even though it should get some auto attack buffs maybe, or some kind of rework of the auto attack. However, that's the important part here. In Berserker, it's the best weapon by far in a power Berserker build, because with the Decapitate buff, it's insane. Decapitate gives you quickness with the Quickness Berserker, and if you hit it, you reset your Decapitate. So that means that you actually can use it all the time and spam it, and that's why Berserker is so spammy, but that's why you can upkeep quickness so easily and deal so much damage. It's very single target heavy, but it's really fun to play in my opinion. It might be a little bit like a piano player, but still. That's why you don't use it in PvP for the most part, because it's just not realistic to actually hit it all the time. And I think it makes a lot of sense to have that weapon as a Berserker weapon, and that's where you use it. In the normal form, if you're not in Berserker form, the burst skill is actually just a very hard-hitting eviscerate. Nowadays it's very power crap, the skill, and it's not that good anymore. In the classic days with Core Warrior, it was actually really fun. If you hit it eviscerate, it actually was like half of the enemy's life bar. It was really fun. Nowadays it's like really hard to hit, and it doesn't reward you for it mostly, so it's just not as good anymore. Then we have Offhand X. It's a really iconic skills, especially the Whirling X. It's really strong. There's a lot of damage. You can move faster. You have a whirl finisher. It's really fun to use as well. It's not used on every single power build in competitive modes because it's just very aggressive and you typically want some block in the offhand. But in PvE, it's almost on every single power build it's used because it's just a lot of damage on a very short cooldown. It's really good. The force skill is also not to be underestimated. I think this is also really, really good how much damage it does, and also gives you quickness. It's really, really good. And it's just, the offhand is really good in power builds. It's just take it every time. Then you have Dagger Mainhand. That's the one that came with Spellbreaker, and it's still very, very useful on Spellbreaker in all modes. In competitive modes because of the CC here and the slow here, and you have some nice just hard-hitting skills here. And the auto attack is very fast, does a lot of damage as well, especially in PvE with the arm straight line. It's a very, very hard-hitting dagger auto attack. It's really, really good. In competitive modes, it's more like for the CC, but the damage is also quite nice. The F1 on the dagger is also quite good. It is a quite nice CC as well. And I would say for the most part, you would typically not use the slicing maelstrom in a berserker. That's a little bit weird, because typically on a power berserker, you would not run dagger. You would typically run X because of the decapitate in PvE, and in competitive mode, power berserker is more run either with a rival or Greatsword or something like that. Dagger is really weird choice. I think that you could make a build out around that, but typically Spellbreaker is better suited for that. So overall, I think Dagger really nice, boon strips, Condi application and CC here, but typically crazy power damage weapon, really nice. Then on the other side, we have Dagger Offhand. I think Dagger Offhand, since its release, it was never really a good spot. It has some boon removal here, but typically you don't need that in PvE, and it's also less damage than X Offhand, for example, or even Mace Offhand. And the Blade Storm, it's not fun to use. It gives some barrier, gives some nice reflect missiles, and there's a lot of just small hitting attacks. I think that's really fun, but it's just not as good as the X Offhand, for example, and it's a long cast time anyway. And I feel like it's X offhand is just better, Mace offhand is better, Dagger offhand is just not very good, and in competitive modes the same applies. It's just you typically can't really use it, even though the Spellbreaker trait here makes it really fun because you get some healing conversion, but still it's not as good as it needs to be. I think they have to look at it again to make it better. That's my take. Maybe some people have some crazy builds here, but I feel like in no real game mode it's actually some kind of good weapon. It's fun, it's not bad, but it's just overshadowed by the others. Then, speaking of overshadowed, let's talk about Greatsword. Greatsword is a very iconic weapon, especially 100 Blades. Just roots in place, does a lot of damage in front of you. You have some whirling attack with an evade in there, you have some blade throw, and you have the rush as a very nice gap closing skill. And the F1, of course, very strong. Even the Berserk F1 Arc Divider is really fun. It got reworked, I think, 1,000 times at this point, but this time it's just one hard-hitting attack and does some nice damage. It's very fun to use, but sadly Greatsword is more like, yes, in PvE you can use it on a Berserker, but in all other elite specs and game modes it's just power crept. It's more like a meme build. You can play it on a Spellbreaker maybe, but it's really aggressive, and the 2 skill is completely useless. It's really bad in all game modes actually. It roots you in place and does not enough damage to actually make that worth it. I think they should rework it that you maybe can move while you cast it or something like that, but still, Greatsword needs some kind of help. I feel like it just got overshadowed by all the buffs of the other weapons, and it just didn't get anything, and that makes it a little bit worse. It's just a straight up power weapon that is not good enough to actually be played in a lot of situations. You can play it, of course, in competitive modes as a duelist, but a lot of times other weapons are actually better for that anyway. Mace is very iconic. It's like the bonk weapon that does a lot of CC with the 3 skill, for example. Nowadays gives barrier as well. 2 skill is some nice block and a counter attack with vulnerability and damage. And the auto attack quite slow, but still some nice damage in there. The Mace F1, the burst skill, is actually a very long CC if you have 3 adrenaline bars. It's really good. Typically you use it more for the Primal Burst, so if you are Condi Berserker, you get access to the Primal Burst Skull Grinder, and that gives some nice daze and confusion and bleeding. It's really, really strong how much conditions it applies to the enemy. It's really strong in competitive modes, PvP, World vs. World as a roamer, but in PvE it's more like not really used on a Condi build. It's more like a power weapon that is actually, because of the nice arm straight line rework, actually worth using also in competitive modes for the power fast hitting auto attacks. But speaking of Mace, we have Mace Offhand, which got a nice rework. Now the 4 skill does some nice damage, might and vulnerability, and if you hit the 5 skill you actually can reset your 4 skill, so you can use it twice, so it's a lot of damage. And if you hit the 5 skill into the 4 skill and then the auto attack, you can actually make a Mace, for example, work very well in competitive modes, because the 5 skill is some heavy knockdown, really, really strong and really fun to use. I think the rework is really nice, it's really cool, and a lot of people like it in a PvE setting as well as a power weapon. It's really good. I think it makes a lot of sense to rework, and you can see they actually have really good ideas for the reworks as well to make them work and not overpowered necessarily, and I hope they do that with Greatsword as well. And I think this is a very clear, nice power weapon that can also be used in some kind of tanky build for the CC, like a healer as well. Then we have Pistol Offhand that came with Bladestorm. It's, I would say, mostly only run on Bladestorm because it needs the ammo recharge stuff of Bladestorm. So you have here some ammo recharge. For your 5 skill you have some damage here and some H's, which is interesting, especially with the defense trait. Shield Master, you can actually reflect stuff with your H's there. It's very unnatural for Warrior to get H's. And then you have Dragon's Roar, just a lot of damage and a lot of small hits that are explosions, so they trigger your stuff from Bladestorm. So it's a really clear Bladestorm weapon. It's a power weapon and it's very aggressive. You can use it in competitive modes and PvE, of course, for the damage, but it's not very supportive at all, or does not really bring any utility other than the H's. So I think it's in a decent spot, but you really see it rarely. Oh, and if you see it, it's only on a Bladestorm. That's just the design of the weapon. And we have Rival. Rival got, I think, reworked the most in the game as a weapon. It's really interesting how much stuff that it now pierces the auto attack. It's some nice range damage. It gives might. It has some really fast hitting volley attack here. It has some blast attack that has a cone. It's really crazy what this weapon now does. You have some immobilize and evade and dash back. It's really interesting what it does. You have some knockback and you recover ammunition with the weapon, and successfully striking a foe reduces the recharge time of this weapon skill. It went from a really straightforward rival that did not do that much to a really, I would say, quite complicated core weapon that is actually quite decent in competitive modes now. And even in PvE, you can use it as a ranged power weapon. Sadly, it's not in a spot where you would say this is the meta pick, because it's just why would you pick it? It doesn't have enough damage. You have some kill shot on the F1 and the gunflame on the Berserker. It's actually very fun in competitive modes because it's actually very fast projectile that you hit and it interrupts the enemy as well. So it's really fun. You can one-shot enemies with that, but it's more like a meme that is somewhat decent actually in competitive modes, but especially if you use an unblockable signet, it's still not the best weapon for just a meta DPS pick. It's just not. And of course, the Rival is a clear power weapon. It doesn't have any condi scaling on it. And then we have Staff as a support weapon. It is very interesting how Staff developed. It was like a bunkery weapon for PvP and World vs. World. Nowadays, it's more like a clear support weapon. You can run it on a Spellbreaker, for example, as a defensive setup. But typically, I would say the intention was to be a clear support weapon for your allies. And the auto attack has some nice heal. The 2 has some healing and might and Flurry. Leap finisher. The 3 is an unblockable Aegis protection and very nice healing as well. The 4 is some pull that is interesting with the retargeting, and the 5 is the Defiant Roar, which gives you some nice block and also some kind of healing as well. So overall, I think the kit is actually quite nice. It lacks a little bit of boons, I would say. That is to upkeep your boons for your allies when compared to other weapons that supporters have nowadays. But it's a very clear weapon that is clear as a support, has some nice healing on there, and I think the spot on Staff where it wants to be is actually quite well hit. But I feel like it needs some trade support. So I feel like it doesn't really have a clear supporter in PvE where you can say this is now crazy good. You can play a Bladestone healer, you can play a Berserker healer, and that makes sense, but it's not as broken as Chronomancer. That tells you a lot about Chronomancer, but I feel like this is either they buff Warrior as a healer or they buff Staff as a heal weapon, but in general I feel like it needs a little bit of more brokenness to actually make it become viable as a healer in PvE, but in competitive modes it's already quite good. And it should be a support weapon. It should not be used as a power or condi weapon. The F1 in Berserk form is of course some nice healing as well and some regen and immobilizes, and in normal form the F1 is actually also applying some nice healing, and that can of course be very helpful. Then we have the Torch Offhand, very clear condi weapon, some nice blast finisher here and a lot of condis. Then the 5 skill, also a fire field, a lot of burning, condition remove, really nice. You can jump through it with your sword, for example, to get a fire aura, which then procs your trades on Berserker. So really clear synergy there. Nice condi weapon. What can I say? I like the design, very worthwhile to run on all condi builds that are quite aggressive. And that's it. I feel like in competitive modes not as strong because it's very aggressive and that's not always what you want. You want some defensive kit as well, but in PvE really strong. Then we have Warhorn, clearly support weapon, swiftness, quickness, removes some conditions. It's a blast finisher, 5 is also blast finisher, barrier, condi cleanse, vigor, really, really good, low cooldowns, fast cast times, really good skills in a support scenario. You can use that in a support warrior in World vs. World, PvP, but also in PvE it's very, very nice offhand. You wouldn't use it, I would say, for the most part in some kind of hybrid build where you also want to deal damage, because oftentimes you want to have some kind of nice damage or defensive offhand and not some kind of supportive offhand, but as a support weapon, very good. Then we have Shield Offhand, clearly a defensive weapon, nice CC on the 4 skill, short at range, but still nice. Then the 5 skill, of course, very nice, 3 seconds block that has a long cooldown, rather long cooldown, but still worthwhile to run in a lot of game modes. It's more of a competitive weapon. I wouldn't typically run that in PvE if you don't want to tank some heavy hits as the tank, for example, but typically it's a real defensive weapon for competitive modes, and I think that's the good spot. And then we have Spear. Spear was really broken because of the F1. It was an evade when it came out. Now they removed it and it's a little bit different. It's still very strong, has some long-range attack, has some more damage here with the blast finisher, has some nice CC that is also piercing and immobilizing. These some nice damage. It's really cool in competitive modes if you hit that. And then the 4 skill, crazy damage as well, long range to the marked target. And the 5 skill is really overloaded. It's one of the most overloaded skill on Warrior. It's a knockback that evades and reflects missiles. When you evade an attack with this attack, you actually get a recharge reduction of 10 seconds, so half of the cooldown is giving back. It's actually really insane what this does, and it's a perfect setup, for example, for your force skill. It's really, really good. And this is the reason why this weapon is very strong in competitive modes. It's a damage dealing CC weapon for Spellbreaker, for example, but in PvE it's more like a very nice DPS weapon. It's not always meta on every build because it's just not perfect for that. But for the most part, I think it's very fun to use, and I like Spear a lot. And then we have the Primal Burst, which is Vibe Throw. It's just a flurry of attacks that is like the sword F1 in Berserk form, more like a power-based version of that. And it's really fun to use. It's really good, I would say, but it's always, you can play it in PvP to some extent, but it's more like a PvE version that is actually making sense. This long cast attack that does some nice damage is more like a PvE thing. So I think overall Spear is in a decent spot. Not as broken as it was when it came out, but still very good. Then we have the Aquatic Spear. I will just quickly cover it. The F1 is obviously some nice damage as well in the Berserk form. The 2 skill obviously a lot of strikes and a lot of damage with each strike. Then you have some pull here, and you have a block, and you have a just spinning attack that does like X5 style a little bit. And I think Spear is really clear, power-based weapon, really fun underwater. I think definitely better than the Harpoon Gun. Harpoon Gun is also power-based, weirdly enough. So underwater, Warrior doesn't really have some kind of condi-based weapon, so it's just power-based, just ranged. It feels like Harpoon Gun is like a rival underwater, and that's about it. It's not very special. It has some evade here and has some knockback here. It's almost exactly like the rival on land, just not that strong, I would say. Spear is better underwater. And the same goes for the F1 as well. So overall, I would say Warrior has, of course, a lot of weapons, and I feel like a lot of them are very useful. Some of them need some help, but overall, I think they all have some crazy good designs. I think they are very fitting to the class. It's not like totally over the top with some other classes, but I feel like that's okay because Warrior is some kind of basic physical class, and it's not some kind of class fantasy like with magic and stuff. So I feel like the weapons are really clear for that. And I feel like we don't have that many options for condi weapons, which is a bit of a shame, but I feel like that's mostly because a lot of weapons are focused to some kind of CC power-based playstyle and not really the condi playstyle that some Warrior builds want to be. They lack some kind of one-handed support weapon. They have Warhorn and they have Staff as a support weapon, but they lack somewhat of a healing-based one-handed weapon, but they have some nice CC to fill that role anyway. So I feel like Warrior is in a decent spot. It needs some help with some weapons, but overall I'm quite happy with it. Let me know your takes in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks again to all my supporters on YouTube, Twitch and Patreon. Thanks you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video.